Today's episode is the story of how I fell in love, left home on a quest for rebirth, and haven't died yet of the Canadian cold. In the middle of all these massive life transitions, I realized one day that I'd basically died to my old identity and was in a bardo state between old and new. And that insight is what led to this podcast, the book I'm working on, and basically most of my professional life at the moment. I hope the story of my transitions helps you to reflect on your own. Welcome to Letting Grow, the podcast about one of the spiritual journey's most difficult and courageous moments, letting go of who we think we should be so we can grow into who we most deeply are. I'm your host, Claire Villarreal, and I appreciate your joining me today. If you listened to last week's episode, you might be wondering if I made it out of that hotel room in Houston and back up to Canada, and the answer is yes. I am back in Gatineau, Quebec, where I live when I'm up here with my partner, Mark, and so I mentioned last time that I would share a little bit more about my own story. It's kind of funny / ironic / I don't know, maybe indicative of my own discomfort with talking about my own personal stuff. But I have interviewed a bunch of really cool people now about transitions and sort of rebirth processes that they went through. And I realized I haven't really shared my own story. And I think maybe that's actually important because it's my own transitions that inspired me to start thinking about bardo states and transitions and really all the stuff on this podcast in the first place. So I'm pleased to be bringing you the story of all the big transitions that I'm going through right now, and it basically all started with meeting a guy. So back in March of 2017, I cannot believe that's almost 4 years ago now, but it is. I was on a cruise with my aunt. It was an amazing cruise, an amazing time to spend with her. But one of many amazing things that happened was one day before the 10th anniversary of my mom's death. And by the way, my mom and her transition, all that kind of stuff, that's another story for another day. But anyway, one day before the 10th anniversary of her death, my aunt, my mom's identical twin sister, and I were in Haifa in Israel. And it was the one time on the whole 2-week cruise with my aunt that I ended up being like by myself for the day. So the ship was in Haifa. It was this amazing opportunity to go see the Baha'i Gardens, which was like the one thing that I really wanted to see on that cruise. So I'm hiking up the hill. If you've ever been in Haifa, it's a port city, and there's sort of like this steep hill up to the Baha'i Gardens and other stuff. There's other things in the city, obviously, but the view down is beautiful because the hill is steep and it overlooks the water. It's really gorgeous. So basically, waiting in line to do the tour of the Baha'i Gardens, I noticed this guy standing next to me, and he's the one who struck up a conversation, but we started talking, and I was blown away by this guy, and like, we just had so much in common, and he seemed so cool. And you know, so we spent a few hours walking around after the tour was over through Haifa together. And he had this really cool accent that I couldn't place. Turns out he's Quebecois. And so basically it was this amazing meeting. And I left him a business card, as one does. And he's from Quebec. So I was like, well, it's too bad he lives so far away and also in a place that is cold because obviously nothing can come from this. Mark was there in Haifa because he was toward the beginning of a 1,000-kilometer trek he was doing all the way through Israel. And he described this as basically like a walking form of retreat for him, which was another reason I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? He's amazing. So anyway, he was going to be in the country for several more weeks, but we did a couple of video chats as he was in the country and sort of making his way south. And then after he got back home to Canada, we did a couple more video chats. I was kind of like surprised by how much I was into this guy. And it didn't take very long. It was about 2 weeks after he got back from his I don't know, I think 6-week trip to Israel. And he flew down to see me in Houston. So basically, long story short, he flew down for like 5 full days and then sort of a bit of a day on either side. And that's all it took really for us to just fall madly in love, at least for me to fall madly in love with him. Don't want to speak for him. But it was one of those connections where I just knew my life was never going to be the same. So I remember like the day that I drove him back to the airport, it was super early in the morning. And I just remember, I don't remember if it was in my car after I got back home. Hopefully it was after I got home. But I remember just like crying and being like, oh, my life cannot go back to being the way it was. Like my life was, I felt very like settled. I was working for Dawn Mountain Center for Tibetan Buddhism, which is the obviously Buddhist Sangha that I have been a member of like approximately forever. I loved my job. All my family is in Texas. Like most of my friends live there. I felt very like rooted there. And all of a sudden, this guy had come down and kind of shaken up my little cozy world. Side note, this reminds me of the beginning of The Hobbit, where Gandalf shows up in the Shire and tries to get Bilbo Baggins to go on an adventure, and Bilbo's not having it until he is having it. So anyway, this is my call to adventure, and I said no in the beginning. I wanted there to be a way to pursue this relationship with Mark, but not have to leave behind basically everything that was comfortable and familiar to me. But here's the other weird timing factor. So I had been at this job for, I guess about 2 years at this point. And we had just launched a big new program. So basically a couple of weeks before Mark came down to visit me, we had this like week-long retreat. And it was the first time in my job that I went from like, being engaged and having a lot of stuff to do to like really starting to feel overwhelmed. And I had my first sort of period of burnout, I would say, during that retreat. So, I was trying to take some time off or just work differently so that things wouldn't be so overwhelming at work. But things did not change. The new program was taking up a lot more time. And over the next couple of years, basically, the burnout just started getting worse and worse at work. And so the way I felt about my life when Mark and I first met over those next couple of years kind of ended up changing. Work became kind of unsustainable for me. And in the meantime, I was getting more serious about this amazing guy. I had visited him a couple of times. I visited him in the winter, so it was love. I do not like cold. I'm cold sensitive. It's not my thing. Somehow, I'll be honest, like the first time I went up in the winter, I was like, I might die. I might not make it back down because it's really cold up there and I don't see how people can survive. Obviously, people live here, so you can survive the winter, but I wasn't convinced. So anyway, that was part of my process of realizing like, I guess people can live up here. Possibly even I could spend long periods of time up in Canada and not die. So by summer of 2018, basically I had decided to leave my job, at least to not work it full time anymore. There were some other projects I wanted to do part time, which have kind of turned into the job that I'm doing now. And also just to clarify how I was able to go up and see Mark and how he was able to come down and see me during this time. A lot of my job could be done online. And my employers were super gracious about, letting me work online for like sometimes a month at a time. And also Mark was working a job where he would have like long stretches of time off because his schedule was, he would work a lot of hours and then have time off. So we were able to kind of make it work and visit each other and not just go crazy being separated most of the time. So basically, I decided I was going to try to make a go of splitting my time between Quebec and Texas and step away from the position that I had at work and just be doing things that could be done online most of the time. So in July of 2018, I rented out my condo in Houston, which was a big deal. I was basically moving out of the first place that I had ever bought, and I had lived there at that point about 10 years. So it felt like a big step. It was a big step. So I moved out, I rented out my condo. I had a little retreat cabin out in the woods, and I rented that out also, and basically kind of went forward into the unknown. I would sing that song from Frozen 2, except A, I don't want to do that to y'all, and B, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to copyright-wise. Like, not that it would be a great rendition of that song, but anyway, if you haven't listened to the song Into the Unknown, you can find it on YouTube, or just watch Frozen 2, it's fabulous. But anyway, I digress. So another thing that happened in the summer of 2018 is that Mark and I got engaged. And we knew that we were going to have to get married for me to be able to apply for permanent residence. So we were engaged for a while. I just felt too busy. I had too much stuff on my plate to want to plan a wedding. And I think Mark was not keen to plan a wedding either. So basically, at the end of the day, my aunt came up to visit us in October of 2019. And we were like, okay, let's surprise her and Mark's parents by just getting married at the courthouse and like not telling them, but bringing them along to the courthouse for lunch and just surprising them with a wedding. So anyway, that's what we did. And I'm super glad because if you're following this timeline, October 2019, we only had a few months left before basically everything shut down for COVID. So we got married a couple of weeks later. I went down south. I had, work stuff to do and just wanted to see family down south. So I spent a couple of months in Texas, and then I came back up in December of 2019. And we really started getting my permanent residence application together. And then we mailed it in March of 2020. And in my mind, I'm hearing the theme from Jaws. Doo-doo, 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 doo-doo. That's my rendition of John Williams' amazing theme from Jaws. Basically, COVID came into the middle of all the transitional states that were already going on for me and just kind of blew everything up for us all. But also, in terms of like applying for permanent residence, and I knew it was going to be about a year from the time I applied for permanent residence to the time I was likely to be accepted, assuming that's what happens. So I knew I was in for an in-between state, like a bardo of becoming, so to speak. If you're not familiar with the bardo of becoming, it's the period between the end of the death process and the beginning of rebirth. It's really a time when you're sort of betwixt and between. You're neither your old identity nor your new identity. So I kind of figured once COVID shut everything down that instead of a year of this in-between state, I was going to have an indefinite amount of time in like yet another in-between state. And we've all lived through COVID. I think we've all had our own sense of the in-betweenness of this time. I'll just say for myself, it's really felt like I already sort of felt like I was going into a cocoon, like when I was up here in Canada, I'd be working on materials for the online course that I have about rebirth. If you're interested in that, I will put a link to it in the show notes. It basically is kind of a deeper dive and some meditations and exercises and stuff like that on the bardo states and transitions. So basically I was kind of coming up with like the body of work that I wanted to be working on for the next, little while here. And in the middle of all that, there was COVID too. So all of a sudden in this in-between state, it was that much harder, for me to make friends potentially in the area where like my partner and I live in Canada. And it was also harder to go back and forth. And one real element of my plan for spending time up here in Canada and also down in Texas was that it was easy to go back and forth. So all of a sudden, it just felt like I really had to hunker down in one place or the other and kind of choose, my partner or my friends and family. And so that was interesting. I mean, I haven't lost anyone to COVID. I feel like my experience of COVID has not been nearly as bad or as traumatic as some people's. So I don't want to complain, but at the same time, I was already in the middle of a bunch of stuff, and then COVID on top of that was kind of stressful. But now skip forward to almost March of 2021, and it seems like there's forward progress on my application for permanent residence. So hopefully once things open back up again, I will be able to work here and meet people and stay for, longer periods of time if I want to. And also in terms of my work life, I've been working on a book proposal about, surprisingly, the Bardo states and transitions. And I think I'm getting closer. I think I'm getting close. I'll just say it out loud. I think I'm getting close to the time when I can send that off and, turn some attention to other things as I wait to hear back from publishers. And also in the middle of COVID, my original business plan, so to speak, was to do, workshops and meditation trainings in person and then sort of do follow-ups online. And everything had to go online for COVID. So that it threw me off my original plan. But I feel like I've been getting more traction with online courses. I'm working on, sort of the back end of the business stuff. And it feels like I'm making progress on that. So it feels at the moment like maybe I'm shifting more into the next phase of this Bardo of Becoming. It's the Bardo of Becoming, a refresher if you're not thinking of all these details about it right now. The beginning of the Bardo of Becoming is where you're really more letting go of the old lifetime. And then you move through really an intermediate state. There's a lot of dreamlike appearances of Buddhas and lights and stuff like that. And then toward the end of the Bardo of Becoming, you start to be more drawn toward your next lifetime. And that's where I feel like I am. I could be wrong. I could listen back to this in a couple months and be like, that was overly optimistic. I'm still stuck in between. But it does feel like things are starting to come together, and I can imagine now what a new normal might look like. I feel like for a long time, just in the middle of the COVID shutdown of everything, it's been difficult personally, but also like collectively to imagine what the new normal is going to look like. So I feel a bit like maybe this is eventually going to come to an end and there will be a new normal for me after years, it feels like, of transitions. So the last thing I want to talk about with this episode is the ways that I've kind of looked back and tried to make sense of all these changes that I've gone through, this transition from really one identity to another. Hi friends, want to join the Letting Grow tribe? I'll be starting a bi-weekly newsletter in early 2021 with links to articles, YouTube videos, other podcasts, and basically the best of the rebirth content I've come across lately. Some examples of the kinds of things I want to share with you include a snap judgment story about a bull who seemed to be the reincarnation of another bull, a viral article about the creepy things kids say, but some of them 100% seem to refer to previous lives, and some excerpts from the book I'm writing now about the lessons Tibetan Buddhist teachings on life and death offer to those of us going through transitions. Spoiler alert, that's all of us. Best of all, if you're subscribed, you'll get links to join free live video calls with me and other subscribers every couple of months. So pause this episode now, find the newsletter sign-up link in the show notes, and join your tribe. So the last thing I want to talk about with this episode is the ways that I've kind of looked back and tried to make sense of all these changes that I've gone through, this transition from really one identity to another. Obviously, I'm using the Bardo states as a model. One thing I really love in life is intellectualizing stuff, maybe getting a little bit of emotional distance by living in my head. So I've definitely done some of that as I have navigated all these changes. And here's my theory, or like my story, of all these transitions that I've been going through, organized according to the Bardo states. So to begin with, there's the Bardo of this life. And I feel like my sort of old normal, like the life before all these like death and rebirth transitions started was working at Dawn Mountain. I had a regular job. Really, like, my identity was very much tied into my position at Dawn Mountain and like my position as like a Dharma student and a Dharma practitioner. That all started to break down really the day that I met Mark in Haifa. So March of 2017. And then through the whole process, both of our falling in love and then also of me kind of burning out at work, both of which were longer term processes. Like, obviously I fell for him when he came down to visit in like May of 2017, but it took a while to get serious enough about the relationship that I was willing to even consider trading in my like nice settled existence and my little hobbit hole for a more nomadic existence. But I went through that whole death process of, realizing I was willing to leave behind an old normal. The Bardo of Clear Light, I think it's difficult to make an exact sort of connection to any one like passage in this story. I tend to think of this Bardo of Clear Light as being more like moments, moments when I had clarity about who I am, what I value, what I want to spend my time doing. And I remember one moment clearly. There had been a retreat at Dawn Mountain, and part of what was difficult for me about working at Dawn Mountain was that I was in charge. Part of my job was broadcasting. So every time we had a retreat, I would end up working the whole retreat, which meant I never really participated live in retreats anymore. So by the time I really fully left my job in 2019 at Dawn Mountain, it had been a couple of years since I had like actually participated live in a retreat. And just as a Dharma student, I found that really difficult. So anyway, like this moment of clarity that I had about retreats and their importance to me, like the fact that I wanted to be a Dharma student again. I remember driving away. I had been in Houston for a retreat. I had been working and I was going to go visit my aunt in San Antonio. And I remember getting on I-10 in Houston and just suddenly realizing, oh, this isn't going to change. I have to quit this job if I ever want to do a retreat live again. So it's moments like that, I think, that I would connect with the Bardo of Clear Light for me. What matters to me? What am I willing to give up and what am I not willing to give up in my life? And then the Bardo of Becoming, I've already kind of talked about this. I feel like that's kind of where I am right now. This in-between period, which we're all in to a certain extent because of COVID. But I feel like there's been, for me, some movement through the Bardo of Becoming, a letting go of the old. It feels like the elements of the new are starting to come together. And at some point in the future, there's going to be a new Bardo of this life. It'll be a new identity for me. I don't really know what that looks like, but I'm looking forward to finding out. So I appreciate you tuning in and sitting through my story of all my transitions. And this is always my hope when somebody shares their transition story on this podcast, but I hope that this has been an opportunity maybe for you to reflect on transitions that you're going through now or that you have gone through in the past, or even COVID that we're all going through together. And just think of, was there an end of an old normal? Was there an in-between state for you? What did you realize was important as part of those transitions that maybe you've gone through in the past or you're going through now? So I'm really curious to hear if you have reflections on that. You can write me. My email address is in the show notes. You can also find me on social media. Maybe I don't say this enough, but I would love to hear from you on social media about your stories of transition. So you can find me at Namaste y'all on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So I will also put the spelling of that in the show notes. And if you use the hashtag lettinggrow, then I will see your post and I can respond to it. So thank you for tuning in, and please let me know what your transitional stories are. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming along for today's exploration of the process of letting grow. If you found this episode helpful, please share it. and subscribe now so you're always in the loop. For links to more content related to today's episode, please see the show notes. See you again next week.